Well, we weren't expecting much, but they still disappointed us. This year's budget has very little to reduce emissions and actually contains significant money to back in fossil fuels. Once again, the biggest fossil fuel subsidy in the budget was the fuel tax credit scheme. The federal government collects around 42 cents for every litre of petrol and diesel sold at the bowser in Australia. For regular drivers, that tax is permanently embedded in the price of fuel. But for some businesses, it's rebated through the fuel tax credit scheme. This year, fuel tax credits will cost the government a hefty $8 billion, forecast to grow to just under $10 billion by 2025. In fact, the government spent more on the fuel tax credit scheme than it did on the Australian Army or the Royal Australian Air Force capabilities, earning the fuel tax credit a spot in the budget's list of top 20 most expensive programs. Not only does this scheme subsidise the consumption of fossil fuels, but the biggest beneficiary is also the mining industry. Based on ATO tax statistics, $3.5 billion of fuel tax credits will go to the mining industry this year. That includes coal mining, metal ore mining and other mining. While the fuel tax credit is certainly the largest fossil fuel subsidy, there are a number of budget measures vying for top spot as the most brazen fossil fuel subsidy. And paying Australia's oil refineries an undisclosed amount to stay open is a strong contender. Domestic oil refiners will receive payments and support for infrastructure upgrades over a 9-year period to shore up Australia's refining capability and improve national security. When the budget papers were released, the cost to taxpayers of this measure was left blank, thanks to the government playing the commercial sensitivities card. The price tag has since been revealed at a hefty $2.3 billion. Since the Commonwealth Government last attempted to rescue domestic refineries via subsidy, half of those refineries have closed down. According to the government's interim liquid fuel security review, Australia is heavily reliant on imports of liquid fuel, and this is unlikely to change. To enhance national fuel security, we need to do more than just pump huge amounts of money into our ageing and uneconomical refineries. We need to reduce our reliance on imported fuel and shift towards locally generated power, a more decentralised energy system and higher uptake of electric vehicles. Unfortunately, this budget offers nothing in the way of reducing demand through EV uptake, and we're still waiting on the final version of the government's liquid fuel security review. While electric vehicles are clearly not a winner in this year's budget, other forms of transport are. This budget sees millions going to the aviation industry, with little of it likely to be contingent on environmental improvements or emissions reduction. The $1.8 billion package over 4 years to support aviation and tourism includes subsidising domestic airfares, helping domestic airports cover the cost of security requirements, and supporting Australian passenger flights to retain flight-ready crews in preparation for international travel. According to Australia Institute research, the pandemic response seriously impacted Australia's domestic aviation and road emissions, but it didn't take long until they returned to past levels. Internationally, the pandemic was used as an excuse to water down the main international agreement for mitigating carbon dioxide emissions from international civil aviation, the CORSIA agreement, reducing the incentive for airlines to curb emissions. The OECD recommends government support for airlines should be made contingent on environmental improvements in order to promote a sustainable pathway for the aviation industry. Any airline stimulus packages should require airlines to reduce emissions in the future and meet the commitments of the CORSIA agreement. So far, Australia doesn't appear to be heeding this advice.
Awesome.